The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine gardens of Clarence's house as Queen Camilla sat in her private study, surrounded by family photographs and cherished mementos. Her fingers traced the golden frame holding a picture of her children, Tom and Laura, taken during happier times when the weight of royal duties seemed lighter on her shoulders. Charles entered the room quietly, his face bearing the stern expression that had become increasingly familiar over the past months. The pressures of the crown had changed him, transforming the once patient man into someone driven by duty above all else. His footsteps echoed against the polished marble floor as he approached her desk. "Camilla, we need to discuss the living arrangements," Charles began, his voice carrying an unusual coldness that made her look up from her correspondence. The morning light streaming through the tall windows seemed to dim as she recognized the gravity in his tone. She had sensed this conversation coming for weeks. The whispers in the corridors, the awkward glances from staff members, and the gradual distance Charles had been maintaining all pointed to this moment. Her heart began to race as she set down her fountain pen, the same one her late father had given her years ago. "What arrangements are you referring to, darling?" she asked, though deep down she already knew the answer. Her voice carried a tremor that she tried desperately to hide, maintaining the composure that years of royal training had instilled in her. Charles moved to the window, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the gardens where her grandchildren had played just the previous weekend. The weight of the crown seemed to press down on his shoulders as he struggled to find the right words for what he needed to say. "Your family's presence here has become problematic," he said finally, each word carefully measured. "The advisors have been quite clear about the need to maintain certain standards and protocols. There are concerns about security, about precedent, and about the message we're sending to the public." Camilla felt as though the air had been sucked from the room. Her family had been her anchor through the turbulent years of public scrutiny and media attention. Tom and Laura, along with their children, had brought joy and normalcy to the otherwise rigid world of royal protocol. "Charles, surely you don't mean," she began. But he cut her off with a raised hand. "The decision has been made, Camilla. It comes from the highest levels of government and the royal household. Your children and grandchildren will need to find alternative accommodations within the month." His words hung in the air like a death sentence. The silence that followed was deafening. Camilla could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears as the reality of his words sank in. Her family, the people who had supported her through every challenge and celebration, were being cast out of their home because of political maneuvering and protocol concerns. "But this is their home too," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Laura's children have their bedrooms here. Tom has his study where he works on his food writing. This isn't just about accommodation, Charles. This is about family." Charles turned from the window, his expression softening slightly as he saw the pain in her eyes. For a moment, the man she had fallen in love with decades ago seemed to peer through the mask of royal duty. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by the steely resolve that the crown demanded. "I understand this is difficult," he said, moving closer to her chair. "But we must think of the greater good. The monarchy must be above reproach, and there are those who question the appropriateness of having your family so prominently placed within the royal household." The words stung like a physical blow. Camilla had spent years winning over the British public, slowly earning their acceptance and respect. She had thought those battles were behind them, that her family had finally found their place within the royal fold. Now it seemed that acceptance was more fragile than she had ever imagined. "Who has raised these concerns?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The old guard within the establishment had never fully embraced her presence in the royal family, and they had been looking for opportunities to diminish her influence ever since Charles took the throne. "It doesn't matter who," Charles replied, avoiding her gaze. "What matters is that we address these concerns before they become a larger issue. The press has been sniffing around, asking questions about preferential treatment and nepotism." Camilla stood from her chair, her legs unsteady beneath her. The woman who had faced down decades of public criticism and media scrutiny suddenly felt vulnerable and exposed. The very institution she had served faithfully was now turning against the people she loved most. "And what of loyalty, Charles?" she asked, her voice growing stronger despite the pain in her heart. "What of the promises we made to each other and to my family when we married? Are those to be cast aside for the sake of political expedience?" Charles moved toward the door, his decision clearly final despite the obvious pain it was causing both of them. The transformation from husband to king was complete, and Camilla realized she was no longer speaking to the man she had married, but to the institution he represented. The arrangements will be made discreetly, he said without turning back. Financial provisions will be generous, and they'll want for nothing. But they cannot remain here. As the door closed behind him, Camilla sank back into her chair, the weight of his words crushing down upon her. Outside, the gardens that had once seemed so beautiful now appeared cold and uninviting. The home that had been filled with laughter and family gatherings would soon become just another royal residence, sterile and formal. The afternoon brought no relief from the morning's devastating conversation. Camilla found herself walking the corridors of Clarence's house, seeing everything through new eyes. Each room held memories that would soon be nothing more than echoes in an empty space. She paused outside Tom's study, where her son often worked on his food writing and cookbooks. The door stood slightly ajar, and she could see him hunched over his laptop, completely unaware that his world was about to be turned upside down. How could she possibly tell him that the home where he had found peace and creativity was no longer his? Laura's laughter drifted up from the garden room below, where she was playing with her children. The sound that had always brought Camilla such joy now felt like a knife twisting in her heart. Those precious moments of normalcy, of being a grandmother and mother within the walls of her own home, were numbered. The weight of the decision pressed down on her shoulders as she made her way to the private sitting room where she often met with her personal secretary. Mrs. Henderson looked up from her papers with concern as Camilla entered, immediately sensing something was terribly wrong. "Your Majesty, is everything quite all right?" the elderly woman asked, setting down her reading glasses. She had served the royal household for over 30 years and had developed an uncanny ability to read the moods and troubles of her employers. Camilla struggled to maintain her composure as she took her usual seat by the fireplace. The same chair where she had read bedtime stories to her grandchildren, where she had shared quiet conversations with Tom and Laura about their hopes and dreams. Soon it would be just another piece of furniture in an empty room. "Mrs. Henderson, I need you to begin making some arrangements," Camilla said, her voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside her. "My family will be relocating within the month." The secretary's face fell, understanding immediately the implications of such a sudden move. She had watched the Parker Bowles family integrate into royal life, had seen the happiness they brought to the Queen, and had witnessed firsthand how much love and laughter filled the house when they were present. "Ma'am, if I may ask, is this a temporary arrangement?" Mrs. Henderson inquired gently, though the look in Camilla's eyes already provided the answer she dreaded to hear. "No," Camilla replied simply. "It is not." The two women sat in silence for a moment, both understanding the magnitude of what this meant. Mrs. Henderson had become more than just a secretary over the years. She had become a confidant and friend. She had seen Camilla at her strongest and most vulnerable moments, and she recognized the particular kind of pain that was now etched across the Queen's face. "What can I do to help?" Mrs. Henderson asked, already reaching for her notebook. Even in the face of heartbreak, duty demanded action. "Find them suitable accommodations," Camilla said, looking out the window at the gardens where her grandchildren were still playing. "Somewhere comfortable, somewhere they can call home. Money is not an object, but discretion is essential." As Mrs. Henderson made notes, Camilla's mind wandered to the conversation she would need to have with her children. How do you explain to your adult children that they are no longer welcome in your home? How do you tell them that the institution you serve has deemed their presence incompatible with royal protocol? The sound of footsteps in the corridor announced Tom's approach. He appeared in the doorway, his face bright with enthusiasm about a new recipe he had been developing. The sight of him, so innocent of what was coming, nearly broke her resolve. "Mom, you'll never believe the combination I've discovered," he began excitedly, but stopped short when he saw her expression. The happiness drained from his face as he recognized the signs of distress that he had learned to read over the years. "What's wrong?" he asked, stepping into the room. Mrs. Henderson quietly excused herself, gathering her papers and leaving the family to their private moment. Camilla patted the chair beside her, gesturing for Tom to sit. How many times had they sat together in this same spot, sharing news both good and bad? How many family discussions had taken place in this very room? Now it was to be the setting for one of the most difficult conversations of her life. "Tom, darling, there's something I need to tell you," she began, her voice catching slightly. "Something that will affect all of us." Tom's face grew serious as he settled into the chair. He had inherited his mother's intuitive nature and could sense that whatever she was about to say would change everything. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow across the room that seemed almost mocking in its beauty. The king has decided that it would be best if you and Laura found alternative living arrangements, she said, the words feeling foreign and cruel in her mouth. There are concerns about protocol and public perception that have made your presence here problematic. The silence that followed was heavy with disbelief. Tom stared at his mother, waiting for her to reveal that this was some kind of mistake or misunderstanding. When no such revelation came, the reality began to sink in. "You mean Charles is throwing us out?" he asked, his voice rising with indignation. "After everything we've done to support you, to support the family, he's just casting us aside." Camilla reached for his hand, desperate to offer some comfort in the midst of the chaos. "It's not personal, Tom. It's about the institution, about maintaining certain standards and appearances." "Not personal." Tom stood abruptly, pacing to the window where he could see his nieces playing in the garden. "Mom, this is our home. Laura's children think of this as their home. How is that not personal?" The pain in his voice was almost unbearable. Camilla had spent so many years protecting her children from the harsh realities of royal life, shielding them from the criticism and scrutiny that came with her position. Now the very institution she served was delivering the cruelest blow of all. "I know how difficult this is," she said, her own voice beginning to crack. "But we must handle this with grace and dignity. We cannot give them any reason to question our loyalty or our commitment to the crown." Tom turned back to face her, his eyes blazing with anger and hurt. Grace and dignity? What about love and loyalty? What about family? Are those values not important to the precious institution? Before Camilla could respond, Laura's voice could be heard calling from downstairs, asking if anyone wanted tea. The normalcy of the request felt surreal given the conversation taking place above. Soon that cheerful voice would be silenced by the same devastating news, and another heart would be broken in service to royal protocol. The evening brought the most difficult family dinner Camilla had ever endured. Laura had joined them with her children, completely unaware of the bombshell that had been dropped earlier that afternoon. The children chattered excitedly about their day, their innocent voices filling the dining room with the kind of joy that would soon be absent from these walls. Tom sat across from his mother, his face a mask of barely controlled emotion. He had agreed to let her break the news to Laura in her own way, but the strain of keeping the secret was evident in every line of his body. He picked at his food, unable to focus on anything except the devastating conversation that lay ahead. "Granny, can we have story time in your study tonight?" asked 7-year-old Eliza, Laura's youngest daughter. "I brought my new book about princesses." The request hit Camilla like a physical blow. How many nights had she spent reading to these precious children in her study, creating memories that she would treasure forever? How could she explain to a 7-year-old that there would be no more story times, no more quiet moments together in the room that had become their special sanctuary? "We'll see, darling," she managed to say, her voice barely steady. "Perhaps after dinner we can talk about that." Laura looked up from her plate, sensing the tension that had settled over the table like a heavy blanket. She had always been perceptive, able to read the moods and emotions of those around her with remarkable accuracy. Something was clearly wrong, and the way her mother and brother were avoiding eye contact only heightened her concern. "Is everything all right, Mom?" Laura asked gently. "You both seem rather quiet tonight." Camilla set down her fork, knowing that the moment she had been dreading could no longer be postponed. The children were still chattering amongst themselves, blissfully unaware that their world was about to change forever. She wished she could preserve their innocence just a little longer, but the truth could not be hidden indefinitely. "Children, why don't you go play in the games room for a while?" she suggested. "The adults need to have a conversation." 10-year-old Freddie, Laura's eldest, immediately sensed the seriousness of the situation. He had inherited his grandmother's intuitive nature and could tell that whatever the adults needed to discuss was not going to be pleasant. He quietly gathered his younger sister and cousin, leading them from the dining room with a maturity beyond his years. Once the children had left, Laura's concern deepened. She looked between her mother and brother, trying to piece together what could have happened to create such an atmosphere of dread. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Tom finally spoke. "Laura, there's something you need to know," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "Something that's going to affect all of us." Laura's hand instinctively moved to her throat, a nervous gesture she had developed as a child when faced with difficult news. "What is it?" Has something happened to Charles? In a manner of speaking, yes, Camilla said softly. Charles has decided that it would be best if our family found alternative living arrangements. We have a month to make other plans. The color drained from Laura's face as the words sank in. She looked around the dining room where they had shared so many meals, celebrated so many birthdays and holidays. The walls seemed to close in around her as she realized that all of this was coming to an end. You mean we have to leave? She whispered, her voice barely audible. But why? What have we done wrong? Camilla reached across the table to take her daughter's hand, but Laura pulled away, her shock quickly transforming into anger. The betrayal she felt was evident in every line of her face, and Camilla's heart broke a little more as she watched her daughter process the devastating news. It's about protocol and public perception, Tom said bitterly. Apparently, our presence here is becoming problematic for the precious institution. Laura stood abruptly from her chair, pacing to the tall windows that overlooked the gardens. The very gardens where her children had learned to ride bikes, where they had hunted for Easter eggs, where they had created countless memories that would now be tainted by this forced departure. The children love it here, she said, her voice breaking. This is the only stable home they've ever known. Freddie doesn't even remember living anywhere else. The weight of that reality settled over the room like a suffocating blanket. These children, who had done nothing except bring joy and laughter to the royal household, were being uprooted because of political maneuvering and institutional prejudices that were beyond their understanding or control. I know, darling, Camilla said, her own composure finally beginning to crack. I know how difficult this is for all of us, but we must find a way to move forward with dignity. Dignity. Laura turned back to face her mother, tears streaming down her cheeks. Where's the dignity in throwing out a family? Where's the dignity in breaking the hearts of children who have done nothing except love their grandmother? The sound of children's laughter drifted in from the games room, a stark contrast to the anguish filling the dining room. Soon those happy voices would be silenced by the news that their beloved home was no longer theirs, that the security and stability they had known was being ripped away from them. We'll find somewhere wonderful, Camilla said desperately, trying to offer some hope in the midst of the devastation. Somewhere the children can be happy, somewhere we can still be a family. But it won't be home, Laura said simply, and those 5 words contained all the heartbreak and loss that was tearing their family apart. Tom moved to comfort his sister, wrapping his arms around her as she sobbed against his shoulder. The sight of her children in such pain was almost more than Camilla could bear. She had spent years protecting them from the harsh realities of royal life, and now the institution she served was delivering the cruelest blow of all. Outside, the sun was setting behind the trees, casting long shadows across the gardens. The golden light that had always seemed so beautiful now felt like a mockery, illuminating a home that would soon be nothing more than a memory. The laughter of the children in the next room served as a painful reminder of what was being lost, of the innocence that would be shattered along with their sense of security and belonging. As night fell over Clarence House, 3 generations of a family sat together in their grief, trying to comprehend how love and loyalty had been deemed incompatible with royal duty. The institution that demanded such sacrifice seemed cold and heartless in the face of their very human pain, and Camilla began to question whether any crown was worth the price that was being demanded of her family. The following morning brought no relief from the emotional devastation of the previous evening. Camilla had spent the night lying awake, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom she shared with Charles. He had worked late in his study, avoiding the difficult conversation they both knew was inevitable. When he finally came to bed, he lay on his side of the mattress like a stranger, the distance between them feeling like an insurmountable chasm. The sound of children's voices in the hallway outside their door served as a painful reminder of what was at stake. Little Eliza was asking Mrs. Henderson about story time, her innocent question carrying none of the weight that it now held for the adults who heard it. How do you explain to a child that their safe haven is being taken away? Camilla rose early and made her way to the morning room, where she often took her breakfast while reviewing correspondence. The familiar routine felt hollow now. Each mundane task weighted with the knowledge that these would be among the last times she would perform them with her family nearby. Tom appeared in the doorway, his face drawn and exhausted. He had clearly spent a sleepless night grappling with the reality of their situation, and the anger from the previous evening had been replaced by a deep sadness that was somehow even more heartbreaking to witness. "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said," he began, settling into the chair across from her. "About handling this with dignity and grace. I understand why you feel that way, but I need you to understand something too." Camilla set down her teacup, giving her son her full attention. The morning light streaming through the windows caught the tears that he was struggling to hold back, and she realized that his pain was even deeper than she had initially understood. "This isn't just about losing a home," Tom continued, his voice thick with emotion. "It's about being told that we're not worthy of being part of this family, that our love and support don't matter as much as public opinion and political maneuvering." The truth of his words hit Camilla like a physical blow. She had been so focused on trying to find a way forward, on maintaining the composure expected of a queen, that she had not fully acknowledged the deeper wound that Charles's decision had inflicted on her children. "You are worthy," she said firmly, reaching across the table to grasp his hand. "You are my children, and you are loved beyond measure. Don't ever let anyone make you feel otherwise." "But Charles doesn't see it that way, does he?" Tom asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "To him, we're just a problem to be solved, an inconvenience to be managed." Before Camilla could respond, the sound of footsteps in the corridor announced Charles's approach. He appeared in the doorway, already dressed for his morning appointments, his face bearing the same mask of royal composure that had become his default expression since ascending to the throne. "Good morning," he said stiffly, the warmth that had once characterized his interactions with Tom now completely absent. The transformation was stark and painful to witness. Tom stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor in the sudden silence. The tension between stepfather and stepson was palpable, years of affection and respect crumbling under the weight of institutional pressure and political calculation. "I'll leave you both to your conversation," Tom said, his voice carefully controlled. "I have arrangements to make." As he moved toward the door, Charles called out to him. "Tom, I want you to know that this decision wasn't made lightly. Sometimes we must make choices that serve the greater good, even when they cause personal pain." Tom paused in the doorway, his back still turned to Charles. When he spoke, his voice carried a sadness that cut through the morning air like a knife. "The greater good? Whose good exactly? Because it certainly isn't good for the children who are about to lose their home, or for the woman who has served this institution faithfully for decades." The silence that followed Tom's departure was deafening. Charles moved to pour himself coffee, his movements mechanical and precise. Camilla watched him, searching for any sign of the man she had married, the man who had once promised to love and protect her family as his own. "He's hurting, Charles," she said softly. "They all are. These are good people who have done nothing except love and support us. How can you be so cold about destroying their sense of security?" Charles set down his cup with more force than necessary, the sound echoing in the quiet room. For a moment, his carefully constructed facade slipped, revealing a glimpse of the internal struggle that was tearing him apart. "Do you think this is easy for me?" he snapped, his voice rising with frustration. "Do you think I enjoy watching your family pack their belongings and leave? But I am the king now, Camilla. Every decision I make affects the future of this institution." "And what about the future of our family?" she asked, standing to face him. "What about the promises we made to each other and to my children when we married? Are those promises worth nothing in the face of political pressure?" Charles turned away from her, moving to the window where he could see the gardens beginning to come alive with the morning light. The groundskeepers were already at work, maintaining the pristine beauty that was expected of a royal residence. Everything had to be perfect, controlled, and acceptable to public scrutiny. "The advisors have made it clear that your family's presence here is becoming a liability," he said, his voice returning to the cold, official tone that had become his default. "There are questions being raised in Parliament, discussions about preferential treatment, and the cost to taxpayers. Since when do we bow to every whim of politicians and advisors?" Camilla demanded, her own anger finally breaking through her carefully maintained composure. "Since when do we sacrifice the people we love for the sake of public opinion polls?" Charles wheeled around to face her, his eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and pain. "Since I became king. Since every decision I make is scrutinized and criticized by people who have never had to bear this responsibility. You think I don't know what this is costing us? You think I don't see the pain in their eyes?" The raw emotion in his voice revealed the depth of his own anguish, but it also highlighted the impossibility of their situation. The institution had claimed another victim, transforming a loving family into casualties of royal protocol and political necessity. Camilla moved closer to him, seeing for the first time the toll that this decision was taking on the man she loved. Then, change it, she whispered. You are the king. You have the power to protect the people you love. No, he said, shaking his head sadly. I am not the king. I am merely the current occupant of a throne that will outlast us all. And that throne demands sacrifices that I never imagined I would have to make. The final week arrived with an autumn chill that seemed to seep into every corner of Clarence's house. Boxes lined the corridors where children had once run freely, their laughter now replaced by the somber efficiency of professional movers. Camilla walked through rooms that had been stripped of personal belongings, each empty space a testament to the love and life that was being systematically erased. She found herself in Laura's former bedroom, now bare except for the built-in furniture that would remain for whoever might occupy the space next. The walls still bore faint marks where pictures had hung, ghostly rectangles that served as reminders of the family portraits, and children's artwork that had once brought warmth to these formal surroundings. A soft knock at the door interrupted her reverie. Mrs. Henderson appeared with a tea tray, her usually composed face showing signs of the strain that had affected everyone in the household over the past weeks. The faithful secretary had become an unexpected casualty of the upheaval, forced to watch as the family she had grown to love was dismantled piece by piece. I thought you might need some tea, ma'am, she said quietly, setting the tray on the small table by the window. The children are in the library, if you'd like to see them before. Her voice trailed off, unable to finish the sentence that would acknowledge the finality of what was happening. In just a few hours, the cars would arrive to take Tom, Laura, and the children to their new temporary accommodation while they searched for a permanent home. Camilla made her way to the library, where she found her grandchildren surrounded by books they were carefully packing into boxes. Freddie was methodically wrapping each volume in tissue paper, his young face serious with concentration. Eliza sat in the middle of the floor, clutching her favorite storybook to her chest. Granny, can you read to me one more time? Eliza asked, her voice small and uncertain. In our special place? The request nearly broke Camilla's resolve. Her study, where they had shared countless bedtime stories, had already been packed up and prepared for its return to purely royal business. But she couldn't deny this final request from her youngest grandchild. Of course, darling, she managed to say. Let's go to Granny's study one last time. As they settled into the familiar armchair that had been their storytelling throne, Camilla opened the well-worn book that had been read so many times its pages were soft with handling. But, as she began to read, the words seemed to catch in her throat. This simple act, which had brought them both such joy, was ending forever. Eliza's small hand reached up to touch her grandmother's cheek, finding the tears that had begun to fall despite Camilla's attempts at composure. Don't be sad, Granny, the child whispered. We'll still love you even if we can't live in your house anymore. The innocent words, spoken with the pure heart of a 7-year-old, finally shattered Camilla's carefully maintained emotional walls. The tears came freely now, years of suppressed pain and frustration pouring out in the presence of the child who loved her unconditionally. I love you too, sweetheart, she whispered back. More than all the stars in the sky. Tom appeared in the doorway, his own eyes red with unshed tears. Mum, it's time, he said gently. The cars are here. The final goodbye was a blur of embraces and whispered promises to stay in touch. Laura clung to her mother, both women understanding that something fundamental had been broken that might never be fully repaired. The children, confused by the adult emotions swirling around them, asked questions that no one could adequately answer. As the cars pulled away from Clarence's house, Camilla stood at the window of her study, watching until they disappeared from view. The silence that settled over the house was profound and unsettling. Rooms that had been filled with life and laughter now felt like a mausoleum, beautiful but cold. Charles found her there an hour later, still standing at the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. He approached slowly, knowing that the damage done to their marriage might be irreparable. The institution he served had demanded the ultimate sacrifice, and he had chosen duty over love. Camilla, he said softly, his voice carrying none of the royal authority that had characterized their recent interactions. I know you may never forgive me for this. She turned to face him, and he was shocked by the change in her appearance. The vibrant woman he had married seemed diminished, aged by the grief that had consumed her over the past month. Her eyes, once bright with warmth and humor, now held a sadness that cut him to his core. Forgiveness is not the issue, Charles, she replied, her voice steady but distant. Trust is. How can I ever trust again that the people I love are safe with you? How can I believe that your promises mean anything when they can be overruled by advisors and politicians? The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. He had broken something precious and irreplaceable in service to an institution that would outlast them all. The crown that he wore felt heavier than ever, its weight measured not in gold and jewels but in the cost of human happiness. Outside, the royal guards continued their patrol of the grounds, their presence a reminder of the security and protocol that had ultimately torn the family apart. These same guards had watched the tearful departures with professional detachment, but even they had been affected by the obvious pain of the children who could no longer call this place home. "I thought I was protecting the monarchy," Charles said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I fear I may have destroyed the very thing that made it worth protecting." Camilla moved past him toward the door, her posture regal despite her obvious pain. "The monarchy will survive, Charles. It always does. The question is whether we will." As she left the study, Charles remained at the window, staring out at gardens that seemed smaller and less beautiful without the sound of children's laughter to bring them to life. The price of the crown had never seemed higher, and for the first time since his coronation, he wondered whether some sacrifices were too great to ask of anyone, even a king. The house settled into its new rhythm of silence and formality, but the ghosts of happier times lingered in every room. The institution had won, but the victory felt hollow and joyless. In choosing protocol over people, duty over love, something essentially human had been lost, leaving behind only the cold perfection of royal tradition and the bitter taste of necessary sacrifice. In the end, the crown remained, but the heart that wore it had been forever changed by the weight of its demands.